RPGs have always been known to have their strongest roots in storytelling, and thankfully Eternal Sonata stands shoulder to shoulder with the best of them. The story takes place with famous composer Chopin lying on his deathbed 3 hours before his death. During these 3 hours, he dreams an extraordinary dream where he meets a variety of lovable characters in a gorgeous world of fantasy and music. This game takes place in that dream and sees you taking up the fight as a young girl known as Polka. The combat in Eternal Sonata is surprisingly inventive and a breath of fresh air for a JRPG. It's essentially a mix of real-time and turn-based elements that blend together to create a smooth cocktail of action and strategy. The way it plays out is you have an action gauge on the left side of the screen, and this will give you either 5 or 4 seconds to move around the battlefield, choose which items to use and which enemy to attack. When you land an attack on an enemy, it refills your action gauge very slightly, but you'll still need to plan which enemies to attack wisely, because if you run too far, you may be left with enough time to only get in a couple of hits. And if you want to get in as many hits as possible, because each time you connect with an attack, your echoes increase, which is what you use to unleash devastating special attacks. These echoes are shared between all of your party members, so planning when to save them and when to use them for other characters is vital. Visually, the game is nothing short of phenomenal. Incredibly crisp visuals presented in a wonderfully lush, colourful palette. Extreme detail is being applied to every inch of the game world, making sure that no matter where your vision drifts in the world of Eternal Sonata, your eyes are always going to be pleased. All in all, Eternal Sonata is an incredible adventure that is well worth seeking out if you're looking for an engrossing story, but more importantly, gameplay. The first part of Resonance of Fate anyone will notice is the setting, which is Tri-Ace's second foray into a post-apocalyptic humanity. The heroes of Resonance of Fate stay on Earth, with all of mankind living upon an enormous and gravity-defying tower by the name of Basil. The higher up the tower you go, the higher up in class it gets. Conversely, the lower you go, the more dangerous it gets, with death running rampant throughout the streets. Now, the three main characters are a trio of mercenaries, continuously hired by the upper class to do their dirty work. There is a story behind all of these tasks, however, that the mercenaries have to go through, though it's not what is most prominent. Taking a few ideas from the battle system of Valkyrie Profile and mixing them with guild missions and to a lesser extent the living world of Radiata stories, Tri-Ace has created a hybrid of many of their previous games all rolled into one. The battle system is a mix of real-time and turn-based. When your characters begin to move, a meter depicting the amount of time they have left begins to count down. When this hits 0, their turn is over and the next one begins. However, you can also perform something called a hero action, which sends your character on a predetermined path that allows him or her to perform a string of high-octane and stylish moves. Every hero action removes 1 gem from that gauge, and if the entire bar is depleted, all of your characters enter a critical condition where the defense is drastically reduced and the bar itself may shatter. You can restore these gems to the bar by killing enemies. It's a rewarding and certainly difficult experience at first, and one you'll want to master as quickly as possible. The game shows that tradition is not necessary to make a fun game. Without a doubt, Resonance of Fate is a worthy addition to the Tri-Ace brand and was a welcoming breath of fresh air. Trinity Souls of Zil is an RPG set in a western fantasy setting, with goblins, elves and all sorts of magical nasties populating the Dungeons and Dragons type universe. Coming from the team behind the Dynasty Warriors games, you're no doubt guaranteed a hack and slash fest of epic proportion, and Trinity Souls delivers this by the bucket load. It's essentially a prequel to the PlayStation 2 original. The story is somewhat convoluted and utilizes cutscenes and stills to progress the tale of a cliched good versus evil storyline, but no matter how weak the narrative may be, gameplay is where it's at, and on this front, Trinity Souls shines. At its core, Trinity is a traditional hack and slash role-playing game that does require quite a bit of button mashing when you face down your foes. Thankfully though, not all of your attacks are melee, and your characters have access to magic and some very impressive weaponry as well. As you progress through the game, your characters are awarded experience, which then allows you to fine-tune them, and even though the game implores a traditional hack and slash system, there is some strategy and tactics available to the player, adding the ability to perform combinations, spells and some nifty quick time events, and everything comes together rather well. The The boss battles are definitely the highlights of this game and can be quite difficult. One feature with the boss battles is that when your foe is weakened, a red arcane circle will be displayed, which allows you to increase your damage. You can also call upon the powers of all three of your characters to unleash a deadly attack in unison. Swapping between characters is done by the shoulder buttons. That does add another element of strategy into the game, as each character has different abilities, and switching between them on the fly feels intuitive and opens up a ton of options for combos. Even though Trinity Souls has its flaws, it's still a respectable RPG that is well worth playing through. Enchanted Arms is very similar to Final Fantasy X's concept, or Final Fantasy XIII more recently. Actually, it is even almost identical, but I personally enjoyed it a lot more. Enchanted Arms doesn't try to be epic or overly melodramatic, yet it still manages to be funny, touching, and compelling. Just like Final Fantasy, you will move on forward from one location to the next. You cannot stray from the path or go on exploring, aside from getting a few treasure chests here and there. The dungeons are pretty simple too, and the game does feel like it could belong in the PlayStation 1 era of RPGs, but I still loved my time with it. Enchanted Arms has a turn-based battle system that places each team on opposing sides of a grid. Characters move in a similar fashion to RPGs like Disgaea. Every character has an element, which in turn has its opposite element, fire versus water for example. There are more nuances too: direct and ranged attacks, combination attacks, support abilities, and powerful EX moves. It is simple to understand, and once you really get the hang of it, you will put some serious thought into characters' moves. When I was well into the game, I always strived for the single turn victory, where I wouldn't even give my opponents a chance to attack. This not only made me feel much more rewarded for my well thought out strategy, it also benefited my characters since they didn't lose any vigor points. These are numbers you will need to watch carefully as you travel through dangerous areas. If you have a love for RPGs, then I strongly suggest Enchanted Arms. It isn't flashy, it follows some conventions, but the battle system is extremely fun and rewarding, offering up something that any fan of the genre can enjoy. If you're at all familiar with the Tales series, you'll know exactly what to expect from Tales of Grace's F. It sees you taking up the role of a young man, Asbel, and after meeting a girl in a flower field who has no idea who she is, Asbel vows to protect and take care of her until she can find her family. Now, Tales of Grace's F uses the CC system for its battles. If you played Tales of Hearts or the other spin-off Kororo, you should be a bit familiar with the CC system. However, both of those games were using the 2D linear approach of the older Tales games, so this was the first time a Tales game had used this setup with a 3D battle system at the same time. The CC mechanic uses a value to determine how many actions you can perform at once. TP is no longer used and instead uses higher amounts of CC to cast spells and arts. Certain actions like dodging an attack, quickly guarding, or defeating an enemy will instantly recover some of these points and allows you to keep your combo chain going. Also, your arts are now divided into two separate types, A and B, which deal physical and magical damage respectively. Your basic attacks will automatically chain into different A arts based on which direction your analog stick is facing. I honestly think the CC system is a good thing for the Tales series. It gives a real fluid feel to the gameplay as you chain a bunch of attacks and are given more opportunities to deal with harder enemies. Exploring the world inside Tales of Grace's F is enjoyable and entertaining because there is so much to do, but it can be fun to go after all the extra side quests and secrets as well. There is also always a way to go back to places you have visited in the game before, just in case you missed a certain item or side quest. Overall, Tales of Grace's F is an amazing RPG. While the plot of the game is probably one of the weaker parts of the experience, it's not enough to completely derail the game, with the gameplay more than fixing any issues players could have with the narrative. If you're looking for a solid RPG to get into on the PlayStation 3, Tales of Grace's F is a great option. The Witch and the Hundred Knights is a fairly significant departure from Nippon Ichi's normal fare, both in terms of gameplay and its narrative content. It revolves around a young lady known as Metalia, who comes across as a rather nasty piece of work. She's rude, aggressive, foul-mouthed and prone to bouts of violence, a far cry from the usual tropey setups in many of Nippon's other games. The gameplay is basically a third-person action RPG with an overhead perspective. The combat itself is reminiscent of the E series. It's very smooth and enjoyable to play and allows you to string together different combinations of weapons for a huge amount of different types of combos that can exploit weaknesses of enemies in a certain area. There's also a dodge roll for dodging attacks, which can make the game go into slow motion when you dodge at the right time before an attack hits you. As the player carries on the adventure, they can switch into different forms that specialize in different types of weapons and skills, as well as deploy magical servants called Tochkas that function as special skills and battle helpers. Overall, it's really fun and addicting, and the amount of randomized loot only adds to the uniqueness of your character and their loadout. But the problems with gameplay mainly come from the technical side, rather than design problems. For one, the camera can be hard to maneuver at times, with no option to adjust the sensitivity. It felt somewhat slow and clunky to turn it around, and I wish it could have been a bit faster. Of course, it's not a complete write-off because of this, and can easily be overlooked as a slight annoyance that doesn't ruin the game on the whole. For those willing to invest some time and give Natalia the love she clearly and most desperately needs, there's a lot to like here. Fairy Fencer F is an RPG that sees you taking up the fight as Fan, an apathetic young man with no real aspirations other than to eat and sleep as much as he pleases whenever he wants. He stumbles upon a bustling town where there just so happens to be a sword stuck in a rock that no one can pull out. Of course, it wouldn't be much of an adventure if our hero couldn't pull the sword from the stone, so he gives it a try and yanks it right out. Out pops a fairy inhabiting the sword, who informs Fan that he is now destined to become a fencer, which is someone who runs around the world in an attempt of collecting all 100 fairies in order to wake up a goddess. Now, I'll be honest with you, the main storyline isn't too creative. However, the interactions between individual characters is actually quite entertaining. It's a long story, of course, in true JRPG fashion. Expect a 30+ hour campaign, so you'll definitely get your money's worth. Now, combat is a turn-based affair, as you can move around anywhere within a predetermined circle before deciding to attack, cast a spell, wait, or try to escape. Alongside your basic attacks, you also have to build up something known as a tension meter, which increases by taking or causing damage, and once it is at a high enough level, you're able to fairy-eyes. You are shown a short action sequence in which the character that is fairy-eying strikes a pose, flings their weapon high into the air, and gets impaled by it on its way down. It transforms your character into a part machine looking fighter, and of course you do a hell of a lot more damage in this state. Taking too much damage will cancel the effect out, however, and you can cancel out of it at any time to save your tension meter for later. This adds a nice amount of strategy to this system. If you're a JRPG fan who simply cannot get enough, this is an easy pickup. Tides of Destiny revolves around two best friends, Aiden and Sonia, who find themselves trapped in the same body and magically transported to a different version of their home island. Like Rune Factory 3 before it, Tides of Destiny features a quest board that helps to guide the player through the game's many tasks. Although there are a few simple fetch or monster slaying quests, most quests involve at least some story that helps the player get to know the game's townfolk better. Quests also lead the way to advancing the game's storyline, which involves Aiden and Sonia's quest to separate back into two people by searching the ocean and discovering what's out there. At this point, the Rune Factory series had been slowly improving its approach to combat, with Tides of Destiny offering much more freedom when it comes to the systems in place. For the first time, the main character could jump, and Aiden's acrobatic double jump gives the player a ton more control over battles than previous games did. No longer will you become stuck in a corner, surrounded by monsters that constantly interrupt your attempt to use a healing potion. Instead, Aiden can use his jumps to get out of corners, dodge enemy attacks, and even attack and change direction in mid-air. Beyond jumping, Tide of Destiny's combat is swift and fluid, even providing special attacks that are learned as Aiden becomes more proficient with specific weapons. It's still a fairly simple combat system. The fast weapons continue to beat slow weapons due to a lack of defensive moves, but it's more fun and interesting than ever before in the Rune Factory series. Of course, it wouldn't be Rune Factory without an abundance of other activities to take part in, such as forging, cooking, medicine making, crafts and carpentry. Of these, forging, cooking and crafts are particularly important, as they are the main ways to improve Aiden's equipment and keep him on top. There's many ways to gather the necessary ingredients, but mainly through items that enemies drop and shops, which provide some of the more rare items. If you're at all fond of the series or this type of RPG in general, Tides of Destiny is a solid option when looking for something like it on the PlayStation 3. Time and Eternity is an RPG that wears its inspiration on its sleeves, mainly 80s Japanese anime, which permeates the entire experience. For those who remember the arcade classic Dragon Slayer, then the art direction of this game will be a pleasant surprise. Instead of focusing strictly on 3D models, the developers decided to take on the challenge of creating every single character in a fully animated fashion. It's a real sight to behold, especially with its 80s anime aesthetic. All of the characters, enemies, and NPCs are drawn in this style, meaning that this went to go on to become a pretty divisive game. If you hate the style, you'll quickly hate the game. If you love the style, however, you won't be able to put it down. The story sees you taking up the part of a princess, Toki, who must travel through time to stop her wedding from being attacked, and thus prevent the death of her groom Toa. After some magical shenanigans take place, he ends up inhabiting a pet dragon the princess owns. It's a bit messy if I'm being honest, but the gameplay is what saves the adventure from becoming another cliched RPG, as the combat is where Time and Eternity really comes into its own. Random encounters play out in a one-on-one manner, quite reminiscent of the classic Punch-Out games, tying in cleverly to the idea that the two must always fight as one. Toki and Toa each have their own skill tree, so you have the freedom to build them as you see fit, give or take a few character-specific branches. Admittedly, Time and Eternity is not going to be for everyone. There's some who will absolutely loathe its unique battle system, and others who will be captivated by its visual presence and vice versa. In my opinion, it's well worth giving it a go. If there is one RPG on the PlayStation 3 that deserved a ton more attention than what it initially received, it has to be Game Republic's Folklore. The first aspect of the game that will likely hit you is the rather mature storyline that deals with many concepts like unconscious thoughts, memories, life and death that nearly anyone who plays it will be able to relate to. It all begins with our two protagonists, Ellen and Keats, being drawn to a mysterious location known as the Village of Dulin, which is said to allow people to travel to other realms. During the daylight hours, you'll move your character around this desolate village, talking with various shady residents and finding out various clues to unravel the mysteries of the Neverworld. When nightfall arrives, the village residents are replaced by creatures known as half-lives, creatures born from human emotion, who enjoy hanging out at the local pub. When you're ready, you can present your memento and journey to the chapter's Neverworld realm. In the realm, your character must battle against the creatures that inhabit it, known as folks. Your goal is to collect these folks and use their abilities in battle to defeat and collect other monsters. Once you've got a good bunch of them on your side, you can press the L2 button to access the folk menu and easily assign whichever ones you want to the face buttons. This simple but intuitive mechanic gives the player a ton of creativity when it comes to approaching battles. There's at least 100 available folks, all with a list of unique abilities that can be combined with each other, which are almost endless and help keep combat from ever feeling repetitive. I believe, however, that the most impressive artistic feature in Folklore is the designs of the folks themselves. Almost every folk has unique designs and animations. You'll be hard pressed to find more creative looking creatures if it passed you by back in the day. There's never been a better time than now to try it out for yourself. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos which release every Monday and Thursday. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Dio, Omar, Awesome Jacket Dude, Pierre, Carl, Strider, GameCube Galaxy and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.